This short recording is to explain cost of equity, and it includes also how do we do it for a multinational company. We start with a regular company that operates only in one country, and then we extend it to multiple multinational companies. We learn in the finance course the CAPM model, capital asset pricing model, and we'll use that as a good reference, as a good example to how you do it in real life. How do you implement estimating cost of equity in real life using the CAPM model? The CAPM model has three components. Risk-free has the beta of the company, has the difference between the expected return on the market portfolio, RM, over the risk-free. Or we can say the three components are the risk-free, the beta, and the risk premium. When the risk premium is measured as the difference between the expected return on the market portfolio over the risk-free. I will jump to the very end, and so we can see where we're heading to, and then I will start in an organized way. The bottom line, we want to arrive to how do we implement it for a multinational company, and using the Excel I provided you to do the valuation. In the Excel, you will have some parameters you put in the main page, and the one in the yellow, like the risk-free, will come automatically. And here we will see how we measure the beta, we'll measure the mature market risk premium, we do some adjustments, and then finally we get into the cost of equity. So let's start from the very beginning. First of all, we need the risk-free. As we said in the cost of debt, we use the 10 years government bonds. That's something you can see online, or you find online. It's not a fixed number, but it's kind of going up and down, mostly around the 2.5%. So if you assume that the risk-free going to be in the future around 2.5%, it's not a bad assumptions. In class, I mentioned that the reason we use 10 years government bonds, it's because it's the less volatile than the 30 years government bonds. 30 years government bonds yield is fluctuating too much and will not be reliable to use as an estimate for what's going to be in the future. So that's why people usually use the 10 years government bonds. Okay, so now that we have the risk-free, we want to go and measure the risk premium. The way we measure the risk premium is by taking every year the return on the market portfolio, and from that we subtract the government 10 years government bonds return. As we see, if we do it for every year and take the average, from 1928 to 2018, the average is 6.38. If we take a shorter period from 68 to 2018, it's 4.24. And if we take for about the 10, 11 years, the last 10 years, it's about 6%. So one, we see that the period we take to do this calculation affect the results. Moreover, and much more serious, is looking at the standard deviation. The standard deviation, even for a long period from 28 to 2018, it's 2.24, which makes the estimations of 6.38 not that reliable, because the standard deviation is so high. And it's true for any period we use. We will have to use really like 400 years in order to reduce such a variance to be this, or such a standard deviation to be a smaller number. But that's what we have. So what do we do? So usually the rule of thumb is really take something that it's more than 4.24, which is the lowest one we're getting here, and make sure it's below the highest. And based on those numbers, assuming 5 or 5, between 5 to 5.5, it won't be a bad idea. In your paper, I suggest that you use 5.25, and then eventually we'll do some sensitivity analysis to see how much is really our valuation being affected by changing that assumption. But 5.25, it's a good number to start with. Here you have the explanation, and two more things that I would like just to mention. One is to reiterate the noisy of the estimation, and the second one is the survivorship bias. What does that mean? That means that when we're measuring every year the return on the stock or the portfolio, what do we have in the portfolio? We have stocks of companies that survive so far. We're kind of eliminating, of course, the stock that used to be and just went bankrupt. So in some respect, the 6.38 difference, it's kind of overestimating the true return over the 10 years government bonds. In another word, we're kind of overestimating the portfolio return because we always every year include only stock of companies that survived. The ones that are not survived are not included, okay? Because we don't really have any way to measure them anymore after they went bankrupt. So that's what it's called, survivorship bias. So by estimating 5.25, we're really more on the lower bound than already closer to 6%. Some respect, we're taking that one into account, taking that effect also into account. Okay, what about the beta? Okay, we saw in the equation, we have the beta times the risk premium. How do we estimate the beta of the company? In finance, you learn you're running a regression and you get the estimate. Unfortunately, that estimator, it's quite noisy. If you look at the standard deviations of the beta estimations in this way of using regression, it's quite high for most of the companies, if not all of them. Therefore, we have to find some kind of a substitute method. There's two ways to go about it. One way is, for example, if I were to estimate the beta of a company called 3M, which has like 6 industries, they are operating in 6 industries, I can take the beta of the industries and do a weighted average of that beta, okay? That's going to give me not a better idea of getting a better estimator for the beta. The more betas, the average of the betas will reduce the variance, of course, of each beta that I'm using from a different industry. That's one way. What I'm really, in here, it's really, we're not giving too much, but we do give up to some extent because the betas we usually use for an industry, it's kind of an average of a lot of companies that are in that segment that 3M is operating. And all those companies, of course, are not exactly doing the same as 3M are doing. So we're kind of giving up of using comparable companies that have operations in the same segments as 3M, but we're gaining that we're reducing the variance by using more companies. So there's some kind of a trade-off between the two. The second method, we will use comparable companies. For example, if I'm estimating for a target company, okay, and I have 3 companies that are, I identify them as comparable. Identifying a company as a comparable, it's a task by itself. Most advisable things to do is to just go into the 10K, the annual report of the company and read about the company, and usually the company itself mentioning companies that are similar to them. So that's a good source for that. Another way, if you don't really have any clues, so you're just going to which industry the company is operating and try to find from that list most comparable companies. Let's assume you already arrived and you got 3 comparable companies to the company we are trying to estimate the beta. You learn in finance that there is a relationship between a leverage beta to unleveraged beta. Unleveraged beta refer to the beta of a company that don't have any debt. And if I have a debt, if the company have a debt, the beta will be higher. By how much will be higher? By that factor we have in parentheses. It's 1 plus 1 minus T times D over E. D meaning the total debt, and E is the total equity of the company. So if I know the unleveraged beta, I can convert it to leverage beta, and vice versa. If I know the leveraged, I can just divide by that factor and I get the unleveraged beta. So the process to arrive to the beta of my company is, first of all, to turn the leverage beta of each comparable company to its unleveraged company, to unleveraged beta, using this equation. How do we do that? For every comparable companies, we measure the debt and the equity. Then we know the ratio, D over E, for each one of them. Then, by knowing the D over E, we plug it inside the equation. We know also the tax rate. We also put it in the equation. And we want to arrive to the unleveraged beta. The only things that we can measure in real life, it's the leverage beta. So here we're running already the regression you learn in finance. We're getting the beta L. In other words, we have the beta L, we have the D over E, and we have the tax rate. In other words, we know that all the stuff that we have in the parentheses, we know the beta L, we can just divide the beta L by that factor that we have in parentheses. We arrive to beta unleveraged. This way we find the beta for each one of those companies. We take the average of all of them and we get an average of 0.93. This is the estimations of the unleveraged beta of our company. Now we want to turn it, of course, to a leveraged beta. How do we do that? Very simple. We just plug in these equations all the parameters of our own company. This one will be the beta U, and then we multiply by 1 plus 1 minus T, the 38%, and then we use the D over E of our own company. If our company has debt to E to equity ratio of 26.68%, that's what we'll plug here. In this one, we'll just multiply it by the 0.93 and we'll get to the beta leverage. This one we can use in the CAPM model to estimate the risk of the return on the equity. Okay, so now that we have the beta, we have the risk premium, we have the risk free, so we just go and plug it in here, and we get our estimator. And that's used to be 30 years ago, or 20 years ago even, the method that most people used. Today the world is global. And in a global world, when we have a multinational company, we cannot really ignore the fact that some companies are operating in countries that are much riskier than the US. So if I'm using the portfolio rate minus the risk-free as an estimation to risk premium, That won't be true for countries like Zimbabwe or Uganda or Argentina or many of other countries in which it's riskier to carry out a business. So we have to take that one into account. Let me just go to, again, to the final page. We're going to do it, there's several ways. One of the most common one is just to add another extra country risk or average country risk to the risk premium. And then the equation is the same. Our task now is how do we arrive to this number? Okay, how do we arrive to the country risk? And there is several methods. I will go into the one that it's most common. Okay, let me just mention the different methods. One way is we can say, okay, let's say I want to do a business I'm doing a business in Argentina. What is the country risk in Argentina? I can say, okay, let's look at bonds that Argentina is issuing in dollars, meaning the government of Argentina is issuing bonds and dominated by a dollar. So I can look at the return that the Argentina government is paying. Let's say it's 10%, and let's see how different it is from what I have in the U.S. And let's say in the U.S. it's 2.5, and in Argentina it's 10%. The spread will be 7.5. Okay, so that's one way to measure how much is higher the government bonds of the countries that I'm doing business in versus the U.S. government bonds. That's one way. A second method, you can look at what it's known as a credit default swap. What is that? Many times, if you buy, let's say, Argentinian government bonds, and you are afraid that the Argentinian government bonds will default on the bonds, you want to buy kind of an insurance. You can go online and you, in fact, can buy what is known as a credit default swap. And in the case that Argentinian government bonds will when the Argentinian governments default on the bonds, you can really exercise this swap and you'll get your money back. But that swap you don't get it for free and it costs. You can take that amount, and can be as a measure, the cost of the CDS could be a measure of the default spread on the government bonds of the countries you do a business in. That's a second method. For your paper, I will, in fact, I will allow you, in fact, I recommend it when you use the third method I'm going to mention. And the third method, I'm going to provide you, I'm providing you an Excel in which you have a rating of many countries. And what you can do really is see the country in which you are operating and see what the rating that country has. If you know the rating of the country, let's say it's A3, then you will have 139 basis point. That means 0.0139 basis point are out of 10,000. That means you'll have, in this case, the default spread will be 1.39%. Okay, don't get confused. 139 out of 10,000 gives you 1.39%. That's the way you measure it. So if you're operating in a country with a default risk of A3, that will be the spread that you will use for your paper. Okay, I did it also easy for you, so you can choose the country and then it does the whole work automatically for you. It looks up for the rating automatically and automatically will pull up the spread that you're supposed to use, and I will show it in a minute. That's a third method. Many times you really don't have, you can't really find countries that have dominated bonds, bonds dominated in dollars. So that's rule out the first method. The second one is more, you can find for a lot of countries CDS, but not all of them, and many times you can't really find them. So the third method can work really for almost all the other countries. Okay, Last and not least, I should say, it's pay attention that here we're really measuring the difference of the default on a government bonds, but we want to really measure how much is more risky to invest in other countries than investing, let's say, in the US. So we really want to measure the difference in the riskiness of investing in the stock market and not in the bonds market in the other country. So in a sense, we are underestimating here the default risk of that country because investing in bonds, it's less risky than investing in equity. So if I'm doing a business in, let's say I said Argentina, let's use a different country, it's Brazil. In Brazil, if you're investing, that's also riskier than the US. And if you're investing in companies or businesses there, that will be more risky than investing in government bonds, the Brazilian government bonds. So I need to take into account really the fact that investing in equity is more risky than investing in debt. One way to fix it is just look at the ratio of the standard deviation of the equity versus the standard deviation of the bonds market. And take that one to kind of as a factor to multiply by what we get when we look at the spread. I will say it again. It's taking the 1.5 in this example, and that's also the number I would like you to use in your paper, just to make your life easier for the paper. And that's not far away from a lot of other markets for a lot of markets, okay? It's to take the standard deviation of the equity market versus the standard deviation of the debt market. That's a factor that's telling me how much more riskier is to invest in equity or in businesses in the country versus investing in the government bonds of those countries. So we'll take the spread and we'll multiply it by 1.5. Let's look at an example. Let's say I have a country in which the rating of the country call for 0.7% as a spread. Let's say this one I get from this table. So if I look at it here, I'm investing in a country in which the country rating is AA3. And that's one call for 70 basis point, which is 0.7%. So if the spread is 0.7, I multiply it by the ratio of 1.5, that's giving me an estimation of a country risk for that specific country. This one I'm adding to the US risk premium. This one gives me the total risk premium of investing in that specific country. I'll repeat it. To find the total risk premium in a specific country, I take the risk premium in the US, we assumed before to be 5.25. We add to that the country risk. And the way we added the country risk, we look at the spread and we multiply it by the 1.5 as the factor of adjusting the spread to the riskiness of investing in a business of this country. In this case, the total risk premium for that country will be 6.3. Let's look at the final equation that I showed in the beginning. In fact, now in this example, what I have in the parentheses, it's the 5.25 plus the 1.5 times 0.7. That gives me 6.3. The risk premium, the total risk premium will be 6.3 in this example. And that's summarizing really the process of arriving to the estimation of the return on equity in our case. Let's look at how the Excel works. You're entering data in the beginning, in the first page. And this one, it's in the second page in the Excel. It's automatically will take the risk-free that we enter in the first page. And then we ask ourselves, how do we get those numbers? How do I get to the unleveraged beta? Okay, here we do it by industry. That's the second method I mentioned above. I remind you. We said there's two methods to measure. One is by comparable companies, and the other one is by industries. This one I mentioned 3M, but I can look at that for any other country. מעניין רונן? כן. איך? נכון, אבל תגיד לו שאתה שם בטוחות, זה הלוואה כללית, אבל לא סתם הלוואה כללית, אלא אתה מוכן לשים בטוחות, כן? ואז אמור להיות הרבה יותר זול. זה כמו אמור להיות כביכול די דומה למשכנתה, אתה מבין? ואז שיעור הריבית צריך להיות יותר נמוך. הבנת? זה לא כמו שמישהו שבא ואין לו כלום, הוא אומר אני רוצה הלוואה כללית. בסדר? על הכיף. אני פה, מתי שאתה רוצה תתקשר. ביי חמוד, ביי. אחת, שתיים, שלוש, אחת, שתיים, שלוש, אחת, שתיים, שלוש. אחת, שתיים, שלוש, אחת, שתיים, שלוש. Okay, how do I get the beta for your company? How do you get your beta? Okay, I mentioned before the method of using comparable companies, and I said in your paper, use the other method, the method that I applied for 3M in another scenario. Okay, how do we do that? We look at the industries in which the company operate, and we take kind of a weighted average of the betas in which the company is operating. Okay, that's the other method. And the Excel works automatically if you know which industries your company is operating. What you're supposed to do in the second folder in the Excel, you go there and there is a place that it says cost of equity. And the cost of equity, you plug here the industries your company operating in, and you should put the revenue that the company is making in that specific industry. You should ask, hey, how do I know those numbers? You simply go to the notes to the financial statements. Or as I said in the class, you download the annual report. It's known as a 10K. You go to the financial statements, and you will not find those numbers in the financial statement. Remember, that's not supposed to be the total revenue unless the company is operating only in one industry. If the company is operating in one industry, this will be the total revenue. But if you're operating, let's say, in 2 or 3 segments, you write all the segments here, and the place you find how much the revenue you have from every segment, you should find it in the notes to the financial statements. When you do that, the Excel is automatically, okay, will pull up from other folders that you have in the Excel, and it will try to estimate the value of that specific segment of operation. In other words, in this example, okay, I have only one industry I'm operating, pharmacy and drugs. The total revenue is such and such. But I'm trying to find what is the market value of this segment that I'm making such amount of revenue. And I'm providing you with those numbers, and I won't get too much into it, how you find them. In a short way, it's just I'm doing an average for a lot of other companies in the same industry. And that average is 3.6. Okay, so that means if a company is making almost 22,000, the market value of that segment is 3.6 times, meaning 78,500. Okay, if I have only one segment, then that's not going to change much. I'm just going to use the beta of that segment, okay? And that's really why we're seeing the 0.8. It's the beta, the unleveraged beta of the pharmacy and drug segment. So in this example, I would get exactly the same number. But if I had a second segment that I'm operating, I will have revenue there, and then I will have a total value. And let's say, for example, just for the example, the beta of the second segment is more risky. It's riskier. So, and let's say it's 1.5. And so the total unleveraged beta will be a weighted average of those two using the market value or the estimation of the market value of those two segments. So I will get a different number here. You can play with it in your Excel, okay? Here in the slide, I cannot do that, okay? Okay, after I get the unleveraged beta, that's the 0.83, the way we're getting the beta or the leveraged beta, it's simply just plugging it in the equation we saw before. We have this equation. The equation, I have the unleveraged beta. I need to use the tax rate, which you plug in the first page of the Excel. The debt to equity you have also in the first Excel. It automatically will calculate for you the leverage beta. That's the way you get to the 1.35 in the Excel I gave you. Okay, so now that I have the beta, now I have also, by the way, we assume that it's 5.25 to be the risk premium in the US. And then we want to add also the default spread for the country risk. I assumed here that I'm operating in a country that the spread for it is 0.4. In fact, if you plug in the first page of the Excel, the country of operations, automatically it would go, look at the rating of that specific country. And for that specific rating, it will look at the Excel that has the spread for that specific rating, okay? And for this example, it's 0.4. Then we multiply the 0.4 by the 1.25, as I mentioned before. That gives me 0.6. I add the 0.6 to the risk premium in the US, I get to 5.85. 5.85 is the risk premium of operating and the country in which our company is operating. This 5.85, I have to multiply by the beta, okay? So the beta times the total risk premium, and that one, whatever I get, I add to the 2.49, I get the 1037. In summary, I just simply plug the 585 into the equation right in here. I use the 1.35 as the beta, and I add the 2.49 as the risk-free, and I will get to the expected return for equity. In this case is 1037. Should be really straightforward and easy. The hard part in your paper will be it's finding out if the company is operating in several industries. If you see that the major operation is in one industry and the other one, they are relatively small, you can ignore it for the paper. Okay, so just take the major one and just plug it here. You automatically will find the unleveraged beta and automatically will find out the leveraged beta for you. Okay, very good. Just a comment for multinational companies. So far, by the way, we talked about only as I'm operating in one country. What about if I'm operating in several countries? If I'm operating in several countries, I'm supposed to do this exercise for this component for all the countries, okay? Since I'm using the same number, it's really, I can do the total risk premium for every country and just take an average for all the countries. And that will be the method to adjust for multinational countries, okay? I won't ask you to do that. Just use one major countries in which you're operating for your paper, okay? But be aware that in real life, it won't be good enough. You will have to use it really for all major countries in which you are operating. If you're operating in a region, you might even just go and calculate a risk premium for a region. I provide it for you in the Excel, but I really don't ask you to do that in the paper. If you feel like you're supposed to, you can come to me. I'll be more than happy to assist you to implement the same method for a multinational country that operates in several regions. And you have those Excels, by the way, in your, you have it in one of the folders in the Excel I provided you. Okay, so let's summarize. In your paper, you use ERP 5.25, you use the ratio of the standard deviation is 1.5, and you implement the beta based on the industries in which your company is operating. That's the end of this short tutorial for equity, how I measure cost of equity. Now that we have cost of equity, we have the cost of debt, we easily can calculate the WACC. And in fact, the WACC is being calculated automatically for you, as you can see in your first page of the Excel I provided you. Thank you.